All right, welcome to the AdaptX Podcast, where we have conversations with individuals building accessible businesses, advocating for inclusion, or excelling in adaptive sports. Our intention is never to speak on behalf of those with disabilities, but to provide a platform to amplify their voice and share ideas into a more accessible world. In this episode, I am joined by Eavan O'Neill, a marathoner, ultramarathoner, and advocate for the blind and visually impaired community. Diagnosed with Stargardt's disease, in 2020, she confronted a prognosis of progressive blindness. Recently, she started Brightside, a support group offering a platform for vulnerability, community, and connection among those experiencing vision loss. Eavan, thank you for joining me today.
Thank you so much for having me. That was such a great introduction.
I try not to focus too much on our guests' diagnoses and conditions, but for those who are unfamiliar with Stargardt's, can you explain how it presents symptomatically?
Yes, of course. So Stargardt disease essentially means you're losing your central vision. So obviously different types of vision loss manifest themselves in people different ways. But for me, Stargardt disease has caused progressive vision loss from the inside, the center of my vision outwards. So I sort of always describe it to people as this giant, if you picture your eye as this giant layer cake and someone punched a hole in the middle of the layer cake and ripped all of the center out. That's sort of how I see the world. Obviously, that's a kind of funny analogy, but I have lost pretty much all of my central vision and I'm legally blind at this point. So I have 2200 vision in both eyes.
So it's a disease that affects the cones of the eyes, correct? Not that we have to get too anatomical about it.
Yes, that's correct, Brendan. So rods are your peripheral, cones are your central. So it basically, when I was first diagnosed, they called it cone dystrophy. Which essentially means something like your cones are deteriorating. There's something wrong with your cones or the cones in your eyes. So that's exactly what it is.
When did you first realize that something was changing or that something was wrong?
My earliest memory of not being able to see correctly was in middle school around 8th grade. I was a very active child. So sports were a big part of my life. And I just remember not being able to see the ball in soccer or lacrosse, basketball very well, and just thinking I needed glasses. And then freshman year of high school, I got glasses and still couldn't really see that well. Now I know why, but then I was still like, this prescription isn't strong enough. And then in college is when I really started to notice the vision loss. So Stargardt disease tends to, and I'm not a doctor, but this is what my doctors have told me, it tends to decline pretty fast and then plateau for however long. So it could be months, it could be years, where your vision remains the same and then it declines again. So I think looking back now, what might have been happening with me is that it started to decline a little bit faster in college. In junior year of college is when I really started to notice something was wrong because I couldn't make out people's faces on campus. I stopped being able to recognize my friends to a point I became more worried because it meant I needed to go back to my optometrist and see what was going on. And then from that point, I was diagnosed with Stargardt disease my senior year of college.
And that was right before the pandemic, correct? So for a time that was particularly isolating for a lot of people, you were also facing a challenging prognosis. So do you think the timing of that changed your outlook in any way or the way that you coped with the prognosis?
That's a really good question. I honestly, looking back now, sort of think about that. The fact that COVID hit 2 months after I was diagnosed, I kind of now think of it as a blessing. At the time, it was definitely like, it felt like, oh my God, what else can go wrong in my life? I have this life-altering diagnosis. And now, not that the pandemic was only happening to me, it was happening to our entire world, but it was like, oh, it felt catastrophic at the time. And now, looking back, it was a blessing in disguise because it gave me this time I didn't know I needed to reflect on what was going on. And also, it was when I first started running. So it became something I ended up needing, this time away from school, because obviously when you find out you're losing your eyesight, it's already hard enough to see. And then you have that added mental and emotional struggle of, oh my God, I can't believe this is happening. And that definitely affected my academics at school. So I think I needed that break. And then eventually the physical outlet, like a lot of people, I started running during COVID and that also became a blessing. So at first I think it was scary, but now looking back, it was needed.
And we'll definitely cover a lot about the running as the episode goes on, but you mentioned being diagnosed senior year, but for the first few years of university, Were you using any assistive tech or accommodations or disclosing to your professors that you were having trouble seeing?
No. So another great question. I, prior to being diagnosed, didn't even know that this existed. I didn't know that you could have progressive vision loss and that there wouldn't be some sort of treatment or cure. I didn't know. I think I had heard of macular degeneration in more elderly people in the elderly community because my good friend's grandfather was sort of having some macular degeneration at the time, but I had never heard of Stargardt disease itself or known that someone my age, and at the time I was 21, and now obviously I've met people that were diagnosed way younger than that, that could happen to someone. So I was not using any adaptive technology. I wasn't using screen readers or didn't have any of my textbooks on tape. And the month before the pandemic, so I was diagnosed January 15th, 2020, and we left school March 13th, 2020. In that time period, I had just started getting into adaptive technology. I had just started disclosing this to my professors, who also had never heard of anything like this, a lot of them. And I was just starting to learn about what tools were within and what I should be using. So it's definitely overwhelming and scary. And again, that's why I think the pandemic coming at that time was helpful because all of my textbooks, like I needed to go on my computer regardless so that I could zoom in. And so anyways, all that's to say is that I wasn't using any at the time.
It's interesting to think about, like, even though there's not a treatment or a cure, and you mentioned some people get diagnosed earlier than you, do you think if you had known maybe in high school or earlier in college that you had a progressive condition and not just poor eyesight, it would have changed what you pursued or kind of drastically changed your career path, maybe? I don't know.
These are all such good questions. I think about that a lot, honestly. I sometimes think of like my life in chunks because 21 years of my life I had, relatively bad towards the end, but I didn't know I had Stargardt disease. So sometimes I think about, you know, who I am, what like my goals and were prior to being diagnosed and what they are now. And I think I'm a firm believer that everything happens for a reason and things come into your life and leave your life for a reason. And I think if I had been diagnosed prior, my reaction to it and response to it would have been different than when I was diagnosed, having been diagnosed senior year of college. I think, there's timing. And I obviously, when I was first diagnosed, wasn't able to embrace it the way I have embraced it now. I think that takes time, but I'm glad, like, I feel grateful, lucky that I didn't get diagnosed until later in life because I think I needed that earlier time of my life to just be, it's hard, but just to be me and be mine without knowing I had Stargardt disease personally.
Yeah, I mean, you're with challenging things and deal with challenging things obviously improves as you get older. So I assume it would have been incredibly hard, like senior year of school, going into college and wondering when it's going to progress and when it's going to get worse. So not that it's a blessing in any way, but I guess the timing of it is interesting for sure. You work at MGH now in the fundraising department, correct?
I do, yeah.
Working on cancer, if I remember correctly from what I read. So first off,
Good
incredibly important work. Thank you to begin. But was that always something that interested you, or did your like career aspirations kind of change as your vision did and as your life did?
So my career aspirations changed drastically after being diagnosed. I wasn't really sure what I wanted to do in college. I was an English and communications major. I love to read and write and I love to speak. I took a lot of public speaking classes and I knew that that was something that I was passionate about, but I didn't know what career path I would necessarily wanted to go down. I was sort of leaning towards like PR and marketing, something creative like that. And after I was diagnosed, I remember immediately thinking about places like I kind of eventually end up in Boston. And so I was thinking about Mass General, I was thinking about Boston Children's, I was thinking about Dana-Farber. And for anyone listening that doesn't know what those places are, they're all really renowned, amazing hospitals in the Boston area that focus on, research for. I also obviously thought about Mass Eye and Ear, which is where my team of doctors works and, where they to find a cure for retinal conditions like Stargardt disease or RP or Usher syndrome, etc. And so I actually had a cousin at the time work in development at Dana-Farber, and so I picked her brain asking about what sort of things she does and what her work is like. And I knew I needed to go into something like that, whether it was going to be something that benefited individuals like me who struggle with vision loss, or whether it was something like cancer, which is what I do now. I knew I needed to do something, quote, for the greater good, but also something that I felt passionate about that was going to be benefiting the lives of others that struggle with things that don't have a cure.
Yeah, unfortunately, the more the diagnosis, the less money gets allocated to research for it. Are there departments or ophthalmologists that are working on treatment and cures for Stargardts?
Yes, I mean, my physician pioneer, Dr. Rachel Huckfelt, she's amazing. One of the best doctors I've ever seen, and she's the one that officially diagnosed me with Stargardt disease. And I obviously like the depths of research. I just know that she always has answers for me when I ask about where research stands and, with clinical trials. And Boston's a great area to be in for that because there's so much research going on at universities and colleges nearby, but also hospitals. And so, yeah, I can't really tell the specific type of research going on currently. Personally, I tend to stray away from that until I see her because I don't want to read the wrong thing or give anyone else a piece of information that's incorrect because that's not my area of expertise. But I have trust in her team and the other doctors at Mass Eye and Ear, like Dr. Commander, who are working with patients like me and also working to find a cure and working with labs at MIT, Harvard, BU, BC, etc.
Yeah, Boston's definitely the to be for hospitals, and we're very fortunate to have it right here where we are. So, are you hopeful are you hopeful there might be a cure or a surgical intervention at some point?
That's a good question. I honestly, being completely honest with you, go back and forth. Like, obviously, I would like a cure or surgical intervention. I think I would love to restore my vision. I think it would be amazing to be able to see things clearly, period, hands down. And it's interesting because I have this conversation often with others that have Stargardt disease and some individuals in my sport group. It's also made me who I am. So it's hard to, as much as I want a cure for myself and others, I also want to acknowledge that it's made me a stronger person and it's made me the individual I am today. I mean, I wouldn't be you today necessarily if I didn't have this, not struggle, but this thing in my life that has completely changed my perspective on gratitude and life itself. So in some ways I'm really grateful for it. And in other ways I would love for it to be cured. So it's kind of a hard question to answer for me sometimes. I think it's me who I am, and it'll still continue to make me who I am and help form my identity while also, even if it was not there, if that makes sense. It's kind of like if I did a cure one day, I would be really happy and that would be great. And I think it would still contribute the experience of having it, and the people I've met and the experiences I've had and opportunities I've had through being diagnosed would still be forming the person I am or help form the person I am.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. Like, for your sake, we hope there will be a cure and it's not going to change who you are. Like, you've already gone that formative experience and you've already developed your perspectives and your approach to life through this experience. So, it's already a formative time, and hopefully for your sake, you're able to get access to something like that does restore vision.
Yeah.
You mentioned running COVID. Now it's a huge part of your life. Obviously a topic that I'm passionate about as well. What initially drew you to it? And audacity is not the word, I guess, but kind of like what audacity to think that it was the best form of exercise as you were losing your vision?
That's a good question. I mean, I have it. It was always for sports. Like, I never dreamed running a marathon or half marathon or ever really considered myself a runner. And then during COVID, there really wasn't anything else to do. I mean, I was in Maine where there's a lot of space, which I'm grateful for, to run. And I had a lot of time. I mean, I was for my senior spring and, also going life-altering change and diagnosis. And I needed ways to get out of the house and get out of my own head, but there was nothing to do because everything was canceled. Everything was, postponed, whatever. And I was just me and my family in my house. And so my neighbor who was furloughed at the time, Madison, was a big runner, big marathoner, and she would go out and run every day. And I eventually joined her and did a couple miles, felt fine, did a couple more the next day, continued to feel good, and started to realize that this physical outlet also became a mental, emotional outlet for me. And, I think how I felt about my body and myself, because when you have a incurable condition, illness, disease, whatever you want to call it, there's a huge feeling of a lack of control because you can't control what's happening, right? There's no way I can stop this myself. So having the control to having the ability to move my arms and legs and run and use my body in that way and fuel my body in that way made me feel strong, capable, and in control. So it sort of helped my mental, emotional, physical connection come back to equilibrium, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. What running like to you? How, I guess, you run differently to account for your vision?
Well, it's changed over time. So in the last 4 years, my vision's worsened, especially in 2021. I really noticed it worsen. So back in 2020, when I was first diagnosed, running was a little bit easier, solo than now. However, I was running with Madison. I tend to run with others. I think that it's safer and easier for me. But at the same time, for a lot of people and myself, running is like a big de-stressing, kind of, and sometimes you just want to be alone and run and not have to talk to anyone, just put your music in or honestly just listen to nothing. And so when it comes to that, I'm honestly just careful. I find a trail or a route, and then I familiarize myself with that really well, whether it means walking it a few times before going on runs. I still have the ability to see 4 or 5 in front of me on the pavement. So, I don't do stop signs or anything. So I use apps or my camera phone not my camera phone. I see things it's all in how you, I don't know, adapt to your surroundings. So it's not easy by any means, but and I ever changing. So, I have some that are visually impaired that use guides for their everyday runs. And that's something I'll probably eventually do too. I just find that it's always going to change and I be as safe as I can.
We are grateful for the support of our first show sponsor. Resolution Fitness offers leading brand health club equipment and accessories for residential and commercial use. In addition to traditional exercise equipment, they specialize in adaptive fitness products and wheelchair accessible machines. If you're interested in outfitting your fitness facility or home gym to be more accessible, visit www.resolutionfitness.ca or the link in the show notes below. Do you think not running with guide is your way of trying to hold on to some degree of autonomy, or do you just feel like you like doing it as a solo endeavor?
Probably a little bit of both, honestly. I think convenience sake, I don't want to have to use a guide every time, but I also accept that is probably coming and will be my reality, and that's fine too. I think it's, I don't learn that's a huge hit to your independence, more than you could ever imagine. My parents have to take me everywhere when I'm home, and then when I'm in Boston, I obviously can walk or take the T, which is nice. But, I have things I needed to do today, and I can't do any of them because I don't have the ability to drive, and no one's here to drive me. And so when I think about running, it's almost like you said, this last way I have, this last kind of bit of independence I still have that I would like to hold on to for as long as I can.
Absolutely. Is there assistive tech? We interviewed the company Haptic, which is building a wearable, and they're hoping that runners will be able to independently run marathons, etc., wearing it as opposed to using a guide. Have you tried any sort of haptic technology or that could kind of help you? Yeah, no. Maybe, yeah, it's interesting. And I know it's, I've shared it with Kyle Robideau and some of my other friends to kind of get there. But I think it's early stages, but it's interesting that more assistive technology like that is becoming available. And hopefully that will continue to grow.
Yes, 100%. I think it will continue to grow as long as we, live in where people are working hard to help people with disabilities. Yeah. And I'm grateful for those people, but I think it will continue to grow. That sounds really cool though. I've never heard of that. So I would love to check it out.
Yeah. I'll send it over to you afterwards.
Okay, please
And
do.
we'll include them in the show notes as well. So there was a mini documentary, Blind Ambition, that Topo posted about your speed project. Can you maybe tell the audience a little bit about like what the speed project is and how you guys put together a team?
Yeah, sure. So the project is this crazy endeavor that I had never heard of before being quote unquote recruited by my good friend Connie. But it's essentially a 300-mile relay race from Los Angeles to Las Vegas. It's totally unsanctioned, no spectators, no aids, no nothing, on your own, you and your team, from getting, it's up to you from point A to point B. And the way I got involved in the speed project is that I used to work really closely with this brand, John G, who I love. They have great running gear. If you haven't heard of them, check them out. And they use a photographer, Chris Shane, sometimes for freelance videography and photography. And Chris went to a conference and met this awesome woman, Connie. And Connie said, Chris, do you want to run this thing called the Speed Project with me? I applied. 2 years later, found out I got in because now it's well known, it's highly sought after. So she got in, you form a team. Said, no, but I know someone who might want to, which is crazy that he even said that because I have never done a marathon or anything remotely close to that. So I was honestly shocked that he even thought of me. But I think he probably saw some opportunity for me there with I like to take on like crazy adventures, especially with losing eyesight, so that I can see more of the world and try new things before I might not be able to. And so I'm sure Chris also had thought of that. And anyways, Connie called me and asked if I wanted to do it. I'd never met this girl. I was like, what are you talking about? And she persisted. I had said no a couple times, honestly. I was like, I'm not doing an ultra marathon, especially out in the middle of nowhere with no help or aid or anything. What if someone gets hurt? All that stuff. And she continued to ask, and eventually I said yes. And just backtracking really quick, this was started by this man named Nils and his friend Blue. And they, were in their mid in LA and were big runners. And they said to each other, maybe we can run to, and I'm probably going to tell the story wrong, so I hope I don't, but maybe we can run to Las Vegas. And they asked four of their friends, two of which are male and two of which were female. So that's why the OG team is 2 females and 4 males. And that was what our team was. And, they found a route. They way to Las Vegas running, and they did it again the following year. And then it eventually became this thing called the Speed Project. And so Connie and I ran on a team with 4 other guys who were great, awesome guys. And Chris documented it, named our team Blind Ambition, not only because I am legally blind and losing my eyesight, which is the obvious, but also because the rest of them were sort of going into it blind as well.
Over the course of however many days it took, how many miles do you think you covered, or do you know that you covered?
I think like 45, and ended up being over 2. It was strenuous, for the lack of a better word. It was a lot, but it was a crazy, really, really cool experience. Like, it just amazing. Never experienced anything like that. It was really cool.
You're running through the night as well. Did you do any legs? I would imagine that would be even harder, obviously, with your vision.
Yeah, that was a huge pain point for the team. It was something I was really worried about going in, and something I disclosed to them before is that, like, I don't think I'll be able to run at night. But there's only 6 of us, and it's 300 something miles, and I eventually needed to step up for my team, and I was honestly terrified. And obviously they weren't going to force me to do anything, but I felt the need to. So the first time I tried to do a leg at night, I stopped and I didn't continue. It just didn't feel good. And the second time I just had a headlamp on my waist, a headlamp on my chest, a headlamp on my head. And I had a car with its high beams on literally directly behind me. And I was able to do some running at night. But it's not easy. I mean, geez, it's not easy let alone someone with my lack of vision. So yeah, it was kind of crazy.
Do they you with a route, or is there any indication of kind of where you're running, or do people run like slightly different distances because they're taking different routes?
People run slightly different distances. Like, there's very, like, Nils and his route, like, they call that one the OG route. So they give you that, and then you also find different ways there yourself. Like, now that they've done it for 11 years now, people have found quicker ways to go, but they're a little bit more dangerous. So it's sort of a toss-up.
And then in 2023, you ran Boston, correct?
I did, yeah. It
Yeah.
was like the
Well,
best day ever.
what was that experience like?
Oh, it was crazy. It was awesome. It was the most emotional race for me too at the same time because I was raising money for Mass Pioneer and for Dr. Huckfeld, who I mentioned previously, and her team, and for research for Stargardt disease. And it was, not only 26 miles, but a lot of fundraising and a lot of sharing my story across different platforms to try and raise awareness and money for this sort of vision loss and other types of vision loss, inherited retinal juvenile macular degeneration, like anything that really falls in that category. So it was amazing. I have this like on me though that every race I do is rainy. I swear every race. So it was rainy and cold, but honestly at the end of the day I'd rather have it be like that than it was this past year where it was really unseasonally hot. So but it was amazing. Listening, if you have run the Boston Marathon, you should do it. It's the best marathon in the world, I'm convinced.
Yeah, we ran in April, but
You did?
But I would happily take my push a wheelchair. So my biggest concern was that it was going to be cold and rainy for Jacob's sake, just like sitting in the chair and getting pelted rain the whole time. At least when you're running, you got like your body temperature comes up and stuff, and you would have just been freezing. So I took the warmer weather, and the wheelchair started early, so we were done a little bit before it got like too hot. But
good.
Yeah,
well,
crazy.
Congratulations. That's
Thanks.
amazing.
Yeah, experience, and the crowds were something never experienced before.
Oh my God, it's amazing, isn't it? The crowds are incredible. The people that come out of the woodworks, the people that volunteer, the police officers, the firemen, the fans, like it's just something that can only in Boston. It's amazing.
Yeah. Do you have aspirations to run some of the other marathon majors or?
I do. Yeah, I do. I don't know what will be next to me. The majors definitely interest me. I think I'd rather do Boston twice than anything just because it was so fun. But I also have this list. When I was first diagnosed with Stargardt disease, I made this list of the top 10 places I want to see before I can't see them. And I told myself that I would do a race, whether it was like a 5K, a full marathon, or what it is, in each place. And so I think I'm more focused on that than I am on the majors, but we'll see.
What's on the list, if you don't mind me asking?
It's sort of top secret. No, I'm kidding. No, it's a variety of places. Like off the top of my head, New Zealand's one. Banff was number 2, which I actually checked off this summer. I ran a half marathon in Banff with my dad. And that was the first one on the list I checked off. And then, I also want to note that when I was first diagnosed, so I was 21, and where I wanted to go then has drastically changed from where I want to go now at 26. So the list is adapting, just as it was like Switzerland, New Zealand, South Africa, Ireland, Patagonia, Chile, Peru. Those are some of the ones I could remember off the top of my head. I have a physical list framed in my house, and then I have obviously the virtual version in my notes app.
Yeah, I don't think I've left central Massachusetts, so that's a list for sure. Although I do have a meeting next Wednesday with my friends in Auckland, New Zealand, about organizing a 5K in 2025. So maybe I'll have to send you a reason. I've developed a good relationship with this in New Zealand that does adaptive fitness, and working with them. And one of our goals for next year is to expand our accessible 5K series. And so they offered to host one there. That'd be cool. But
oh my God. Yeah, sign me up. That sounds amazing.
You mentioned earlier about the Brightside group support network. So I would imagine one of the first things when you're diagnosed with something like Stargardt's is to try to find other people that have the condition and talk to them. Were there any specific people that kind of played a pivotal role in your acceptance or your coping and diagnosis?
Wow, that's a really, really good question, Brendan. I honestly don't know if I've ever been to that before. Do you mean in terms of they had a visual disability as well, or someone just in general?
Yeah, so less so the medical professional, and more so someone accomplished great things, their disability that kind of gave you the confidence to pursue your own goals. But
wow, really good question. I mean, when I was first diagnosed, it was really, this is another reason why I started Brightside. It was for me to find people to connect with that I found were like myself, or, still wanting to live a full life, regardless constraint, lack of a better word. And really hard to find people also my age. I was 21, like I said, when I was diagnosed. And in the state of Maine, I remember when I was first speaking with the doctor who diagnosed me with cone dystrophy before I was diagnosed officially with Stargardt disease in Maine, she said, you know, there's one other person that I treat or that I see who has Stargardt disease who's around your age. Because of HIPAA, obviously I can't disclose their name or information, but I do want to tell you and I said, is there one other person in the state of Maine? And she was like, there's one other person in southern Maine that I'm aware of. And then 4 of them are above the age of 75. So I was like, okay, I am worried that there's no one else I'll be able with. Like, I don't know what this is. I was really scared. There's no that I immediately found that also had a visual impairment that I was like, I need to. Actually, you know what? I take that back. I found 2 blind brothers right away, which if you don't know 2 blind brothers, they're these 2 brothers, Brian and Brad Manning, who created this as well. And they were diagnosed at a really young age, I think 7 or 8. And they created this brand where all of their clothes, it's more about the feel of their clothing and the quality rather than the look. Because of the fact that they're visually impaired. So I did try and reach out to them when I was first diagnosed, but you know, my family and my friends were the biggest role models for parents and the way that they not handled this, but the way they reacted and the way they supported me. And my friend Madison, who got me into running, and my friends who continue to support me and try and understand what this is like. And people like you who have me on their podcast and are willing to hear my story and share it with others. Those are the types of people that keep me going. And those are the types of people I look up to. So it's sort of, there isn't one specific person that I can think of to answer your question. It's really people I meet along the way.
How can friends or family more effectively support someone, or what, I guess, what characteristics or behaviors did you find to most beneficial for you from your friends and family?
That's a great question. I think asking questions. I think that's the biggest thing. And I know that asking people about things going on in their life might be uncomfortable, is really hard, but I think it's really important. I also, in that same vein, think there's a way to ask questions that's better than others. You know, rather than saying, oh, can you see that? And pointing to the distance, you should say, is there anything I can help you see? Or what's it like for you to see right now? I'm curious. I want to learn more. You know, rephrasing it like that rather than the blunt, can you see? Why can't you see that? Or, you know, the classic, how many fingers am I holding up type of, you know, people obviously don't do that to me anymore, but before they did. And I think asking, you know, meaningful, smart questions and trying to learn more about my field is helpful for me. And also just learning more about how they can spread awareness and advocate for others with visual disabilities or any disability for that matter.
Yeah, that's a good segue into a question that we typically like. What would you want a fitness professional? I know we kind of already had this conversation, but what would you want to ask you about diagnosis?
I guess I would want them to ask what they can do to help during the workout. So the number one thing is kindness, to be open, kind, and understanding. There are tons of fitness instructors out there, right? And all of them don't know what visual impairments can look like. Blindness is a spectrum, so it can look completely different for everyone. And I think it's really hard to disclose that information to a stranger sometimes, especially if you're about to start a class with 20 other people. So if I were to go up to a fitness instructor or someone at the gym, personal trainer, whomever, who was helping me with my workout, I would want them to say, what can I do to help make this the best workout for you? You know, at a Pilates studio, if I'm using a reformer, I've told before, Brendan, but I want them to change the rungs on the reformer for me because I can't see those colors or what needs to be done. It's just easier if they do it for me if they're able. And, you know, I think just making sure I'm confident while I'm workout is the most important thing. You know, how can I make you feel the most comfortable? How can the easiest for you? How can I make this workout feel good for you with your, you know, abilities?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
What assumptions have people made about you? I'm approaching this from the lens of like etiquette and disability inclusion language. Like what assumptions have people made about your disability that maybe bothers you? And I only ask that so we can then avoid making that assumption or encourage people to avoid making those assumptions.
Oh, I appreciate you asking that question because I think it's so important because I know for a lot of members of Brightside and a lot of people in the visual vision loss community, anyone that's dealing with any sort of vision loss, a huge pain point is that people think because we can do XYZ, we're not blind, or because we don't carry a cane, we're not blind, or because we don't have a seeing eye dog, we're not blind. None of that is true. It's like I told you before, blindness is a spectrum. It looks so different for everyone that's experiencing it, and you need to be understanding and compassionate about that. I don't, I think people, there's just such a stigma, and there's stigmas in this world, and there's a lot of stereotypes with everything. And I myself am at fault of that too. And I just think it's important to be open and be willing to learn and stand that someone's ability to see, taste, touch, hear anything, walk, hold things, anything, run, changes depending on what their diagnosis is, their trajectory. Everyone could be dealing with different things. This isn't just vision loss related too. Now it's more general. Like, you just need to be open and understanding and willing to learn and how you can be the best, advocate for them, and how you can be the most respectful of yourself towards people with a disability.
When you're navigating the train system and just walking throughout Boston, you do so independently without any sort of cane?
I don't use a cane right now. I know for my friends that experience vision loss, they'll bring their cane sometimes on public transportation or a lot of times to the airport, which can help be like a visual identifier for people because, Stargardt disease can be an invisible disability depending on where in your diagnosis. And so I think it can be helpful a lot of the times. I personally don't use one right now. I use different apps on my phone to see things. And I know for people with vision loss, they also use their phone camera to zoom in on a lot of things. That's how I see like everything. So right now that's where I'm at. But like I said, ever changing.
Yeah, I guess that's kind of what my thought process was. Like, it's an invisible disability in that it's not noticeable to just standers. So if you have your cane, then I would assume people on the train are gonna offer you their seats or move out of the way or just like do some of the more common decency things because you have that representation. So, but do you find yourself not wanting that attention? And is that one of the reasons that you opt not to use a cane, or?
I don't know. It's not necessarily that I don't want people thinking that. I mean, it's more just that I've gone my whole life without it. If I implement it into my routine, it's a new thing, and it's just I need to do that slowly and by step, just like I just used a guide for the first time on a race, and that takes a bigger mental emotional toll on you than you can imagine. I didn't really realize until I experienced it. And so I think it's more just a personal preference of like I just want to take my time using the cane, and I want to learn more about, not learn more about, but I just want to my time with it, honestly. I also should say, like, using a cane in front of others can be hard, especially when you still have some field of vision, because you might be worried about what people think. But at the same time, having Stargardt disease has helped me realize that whatever anyone else thinks doesn't matter. So it's
I
more
assume,
just a personal preference.
yeah, I assume you hear a lot of the different personal preferences within support group, hearing
Yeah.
from the different members kind of what they prefer. So it's hard to make generalizations like everyone with visual impairment prefers, or when you're
Yeah.
interacting with someone blind, you should do this. So it's very individualized, but that's where I guess the rapport and the asking genuine questions is the most important first step. Do you want to be considered an inspiration?
I mean, that's up to the person,
I guess it's just in the disability space where I guess the commonly accepted term is kind of inspiration porn. Whenever someone with a disability does something to be applauded, and it's a little bit exacerbated. And yeah, I guess we hear differing points of views as to whether people being called inspirational. I'm sure you've heard it before, like whether you like that role.
I am going to do what I do regardless of what people say about me. I understand what you mean by like someone with a disability doing and being called an inspiration. How can interpret that differently and feel differently about it? And I definitely respect how anyone feels about that. I don't mind it. I think people are just trying to show their love. And in my opinion, some people will just use that word as a way to say that. And I find it kind and nice that they're even acknowledging that I'm taking something on that they find inspirational. It doesn't really bother me either way,
Yeah.
what
The things you've done are certainly inspirational. They're incredible feats for anyone, regardless of a visual impairment. So when you add on that layer of, like you've mentioned, constraints or complexities, it makes it even that much more. But what have you learned? What have you learned about yourself since you were diagnosed with Stargardt's?
Wow. I've learned a lot about myself. I've learned that I'm stronger than I think I am. I've learned that courage can take you really far. And I've learned that the most important thing to me in my life is helping others. And I don't think I realized how much community meant to much, building a community and building relationships with others meant to me prior to being diagnosed. I think anyone who's facing something like this, or human beings, we're all sort of facing we all have things in our life that aren't the easiest to deal with. And I think through my experience with Stargardt disease, I've, like I said, cared less about what others think, become more confident in my own skin, and realized that you're not going to get anything done in this life without the ones you love supporting you and you supporting others. I think we all need each other more than we think we do.
What are you most excited about over the next 2 years?
I'm excited about growing Brightside. I'm excited about running more, becoming more connected with my community and building this community even bigger. When I was first diagnosed, I needed someone to talk to, someone that I related to, or that could make me feel better about what I was going through, because it is so isolating. It can be so isolating, especially if your life that is experiencing this or going through something like this. And I am excited to meet more people that might need a friend and become that friend, or help them find a voice, help them find a group of they can relate to and talk to, and have a community outside of their family or friends that understands exactly what it's like to lose your vision. That really excites me. And so, yeah.
Oh, Evan, thank you. I hope the questions were okay. Thank you for being vulnerable and sharing so much.
Oh my gosh. You have such great questions, Brennan. Your questions were amazing. Like, I loved them.
Thanks. We've recorded a few episodes over the year, so it's certainly been one of my favorites, though. So thank you for taking the time this morning.
Thank you for having me. It's such an honor to even be asked to be on the podcast, and it's so nice to chat with you. And you're such a good interviewer. Like, you really have a knack for this. So it was honestly thank you for having me.
Thank you. Thank you for listening to the AdaptX Podcast. Our effort to amplify the ideas of our guests and create more inclusive and accessible industries is futile unless these episodes reach a larger audience. If you enjoyed our discussion today, please leave us a rating or a review on whichever platform you use. And if you would like to learn more about AdaptX, the course that we teach to health and fitness professionals and the projects that our organization is working on, you can subscribe to our newsletter through our website, www.adaptx.org. Until next Monday.